Chapter 2, Written in the Rocks. The fossil record is some of the best evidence we have to support the theory of evolution. It literally gives us a way to look into the past. The process behind making a fossil is simple yet extraordinary. First, though this may seem very obvious to some, an organism needs to die. Second, its remains need to be covered fairly quickly by sediment. If this does not happen, they will decay or risk falling prey to scavengers. Third, water slowly replaces the hard portions of remains with dissolved minerals from the sediment. Most fossils are marine creatures because when they die, they're already conveniently submerged in a place that has both the water and the sediment. Fourth, the fossil needs to become exposed to the surface and discovered. This exposure comes with its own set of risks. Natural occurrences like wind and rain can damage the fossils before they are found. It is estimated that the fossil record only documents 0.1 to 1% of all life to ever exist. It is mind-boggling to consider just how many living things have ever existed. Because of the conditions it takes to make a fossil, there are bound to be astronomical numbers of species that will never be documented. Before 1945, we could only determine the relative age of strata using the principle of superposition, which was first proposed by Nicholas Steno. This concept means that a deeper layer of rock is older than a more shallow layer. Nowadays, we can measure how old a rock actually is using radioisotopes in igneous rock. The decay of these isotopes into other elements can be measured using half-lives. The rate itself varies depending on the isotope. For example, this cookie has a half-life of 1 day. Every night, half the cookie from the previous day is gone. Night 1, you have a whole cookie. Night 2, you have half of that. Night 3, you have half of that half, and so on and so forth. For older rocks, uranium-235 is commonly used. Because the radioisotopes do not occur in sedimentary rocks, fossils cannot be dated directly. There are several things that the fossil record should, and does in many cases, show us. There should be a trend from simple organisms into more complex ones. We should see newer species sharing some traits with their ancestors and see the splitting of one species into more. For example, marsupial fossils are mainly found in Australia, where most modern marsupials today live. The modern marsupials share many traits with their fossilized ancestors. This is exactly what we would expect and predict from the fossil record. When discussing big patterns in evolution, it is important to emphasize the trend from the simple to the complex again. The first appearance of major groups is not a very specific point because their evolutions were so gradual. These groups did not evolve into their current complex forms overnight. Photosynthetic bacteria were the first organisms, and they ruled the earth for billions of years. This was followed by the evolution of the first simple eukaryotes. They evolved into slightly more complex multicellular forms like jellyfish and sponges. The Cambrian explosion, which happened approximately 542 million years ago, saw the creation of most major phyla. Evolutionary change is documented by fossilization. There are two major schools of thought here: gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. Gradualism suggests slow changes over time, while punctuated equilibrium suggests long periods of stability between the changes. Though changes themselves in specific lineage sometimes seem to jump back and forth, it is still possible to see patterns in its evolution. For example, while some lineages of trilobites waver in the number of their ribs, all show a net increase. That being said, though we can observe evolutionary changes like this, we cannot always know the pressures that led to it. Though it is highly unlikely to find the actual missing link between two species, we can look at a closely related ancestor of that link to get a very good idea of what it might have looked like. One such organism is Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik, discovered by Neil Shubin, is a famous transitional form between lobe-finned fish and amphibians. It had lobe-finned fish characteristics like gills, scales, fins, and it definitely lived in the water. It also had amphibian-like features, like a neck and a flat head that featured eyes and nostrils on the tops of its skull instead of the sides, letting it look above the surface of the shallow waters it lived in. It could lift itself up with its fins, which resemble the bones and the limbs of the land dwellers that would follow. Sturdy ribs allowed Tiktaalik to pump air in and out of its lungs as well. The transitional form between theropod dinosaurs like the Tyrannosaurus rex and modern birds is Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is more closely related to the theropods than flying birds, but it has two very significant bird-like traits. One, it had large feathers, and two, it had an opposable big toe used for perching, much like modern birds. This is a good example of mosaic evolution. While not all of its traits change at once, a few small things changed gradually. The ground-up scenario suggests that flight evolved as open-armed runs and leaps used to catch prey. Whale evolution is very well documented by the fossil record. Whales are aquatic mammals. They're not fish. They are warm-blooded and their young survive off milk. They have hair on their blowholes. Their vestigial characteristics prove they are evolved from land-dwelling creatures. They have a vestigial pelvic bone and a femur bone, which are now used for reproductive purposes. They do have some unique traits, too, that help differentiate them from land mammals, well, besides the tail. For example, they have conical teeth and blowholes, which are just a nostril on the very tops of their heads. One possible explanation for this move back into the water is that with the extinction of the dinosaurs and their aquatic relatives, a new niche opened up for the aquatic mammals to eventually fill. Evolution is in fact real, and the fossil record proves this. Transitional forms occur in spaces between species that make logical sense. Evolution is just the modification of older traits into new ones.